I'm delighted to be able to introduce Hubie Jones. Born in New York City in 1933, Hubie earned his bachelor's degree from the City College of New York in 1955 and went straight on to get his social work degree, something we don't often recommend to students, but he did it, at Boston University, of which, of course, we're very proud. After a stint in a couple of other settings, he became the first associate director and then the executive director at Roxbury Multi-Service Center, a thriving institution to this day. Hubie chaired a task force that eventually became known as the Massachusetts Advocates for Children. His work resulted in a report that eventually led to the enactment of two landmark laws, the special education law and the bilingual education law, to ensure that vulnerable children received the education they deserved. This task force work served as the inspiration for the Children's Defense Fund in Washington, D.C. I would shorten my introduction, Hubie, but you've done a little too much, so I have to keep going. Hubie developed a particular style of advocacy. It's uncompromising, thorough, tough, but always respectful and designed to bring out the best in both sides. His commitment to social justice stands as a beacon for all of us. His identity is as an institution builder, a mentor, a problem solver, a teacher, an administrator, a television commentator, and an advocate. Among more than 30 organizations that Hubie has played key roles in, here are just a few, one of which we're very proud, Dean and Professor, Boston University School of Social Work from 1977 to 1993, and now Dean Emeritus. Board President of Roxbury Youth Works, Board President of Roxbury Community College Foundation, and Acting President of Roxbury Community College. Director of the Community Fellows Program at MIT, Board Member of City Year, panelist on 5 on 5, a public affairs program on TV for over 20 years. While at UMass Boston, Hubie launched the City to City program, which I know a number of you read about in the Boston Globe on a Sunday, taking Boston corporate, government, and nonprofit leaders to visit cities like Atlanta, Belfast, Barcelona, Chicago, and Boston to learn how leaders solve problems, shape opportunities, and make development projects happen. In 2002, he founded the Boston Children's Chorus, which has become an instrument of social justice. Their premier performance was at the same Jordan Hall where Hubie heard Martin Luther King 48 years earlier. Hubie is a rare individual of integrity, talent, and humility who is known and admired by people from all segments of society. He is also the husband of Dr. Catherine Butler Jones and father to 8 grown children. I introduce you to Hubie Jones.
Good evening. Good evening. You are alive and well. First of all, thank you, Gail, for that too generous introduction. And it is a pleasure to be here at Boston University and to see some of my colleagues and old friends. So thanks for having me here. The idea for this talk germinated at a wonderful lunch with your colleagues Ken Shulman and Betty Ruth while we were ruminating about political, economic, and social developments in Greater Boston, Massachusetts, and the nation. Between mouthfuls of delicious salmon, I asserted that we are experiencing a powerful transformative moment here in the Commonwealth and in many other parts of the United States, and that I did not see the social work community prepared or ready to take advantage of this good fortune. Let me say at the outset, I'm not here to just speak at you in didactic mode. My intention is to facilitate a conversation about this transformative moment and discover what you see as social workers, social work's opportunities and responsibilities at this juncture in our nation's history. I will try not to pontificate, which I am prone to do. First, I will provide a framework for analysis, quote unquote, and some evidence for my assertions. Then I will open it up for a robust conversation and dialogue. In 2005, the gubernatorial campaign and election of Deval Patrick as governor signaled a transformative phenomenon in Massachusetts. Patrick, a political neophyte who had worked outside our state for 10 years, stunned the political establishment through a sophisticated grassroots campaign that tapped the intense desire for change in the electorate. Few politicians and pundits understood the change environment at work, and still don't. By the time they woke up, Deval Patrick was unstoppable. The traditional political calculus does not work anymore because shifting sentiments, worldviews, and constituencies are moving on different planes. The old guard has been catapulted into a state of disequilibrium, creating for them disorientation and confusion. They are simply flailing about in a counterproductive fashion. On the national level, transformation is signaled by the high likelihood that a woman or African American man will be elected President of the United States. For progressives, the light at the end of the long, dark tunnel is getting brighter and brighter. Getting out of the tunnel is now a real possibility. We sense that change is in the air, and that a great portion of the populace is prepared to jettison negative racial and gender attitudes that have trapped us in a horrific state of limited possibilities. It might be dawning on the American people that we can never be the country we profess to be unless we embrace the talents of all of our citizens without regard to gender, race, ethnicity, and social class. No, Nirvana is not right around the corner, because racism, sexism, and xenophobia, and all of the social structures that support them are alive and well. Nevertheless, societal change, I believe, is in motion. Frankly, I do not know or understand what is fully at play. I am trying to figure it all out. And with your help this evening, I hope to make some progress. The national polls registered that the majority of our citizens believe that our country is going in the wrong direction. More than 70% of those polled want an end to the war in Iraq and changes in domestic policies that have plunged our economy into shambles. We witness millions of young people, most for the first time, flooding into presidential primaries and caucuses, expressing their strong objections to current national priorities and practices. These young people are not just voting, they are also the backbone of much of the political organizing on the ground and on the internet. They simply want a departure from the status quo, and nothing makes clearer their aspirations than their drive to place a woman or African American in the White House. They seek path-breaking change. During this political season, candidates from all parties and places on the political spectrum have articulated the mantra for change in response to rising sentiment for change in the electorate. They differ widely on the changes they are willing to push for. However, the electorate will sort it all out and render a verdict on November 4th, 2008. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the noted historian, claimed that our national politics and priorities oscillate in historical cycles lasting about 30 years. He posited that we move from a period where governmental policies and practices are focused on advancing private interest to a cycle focused on advancing public purpose. I embrace this insight. Over almost 8 years of the Bush presidency, We have witnessed private interests served in excessive ways. It has been a brutal experience to watch play out. These excesses are having disastrous economic and social consequences, and the electorate is deeply disturbed about them. They want private interest governance stopped dead in its tracks. Therefore, we will now move toward a cycle of public purpose governance. And after a number of years, we will see some excesses and failures that will usher in another cycle of private interest governance. Hopefully, the new cycle will last for 25 to 30 years. That is what is at stake now. The good news is that public purpose governance usually leaves positive legacies that become deeply institutionalized as social utilities, entitlements, and structures that are rarely reversed during the private interest cycles. Social Security, Medicare, and Head Start are examples of quote-unquote untouchable entitlements that withstand political assaults. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Security and Exchange Commission are examples of institutions growing out of the New Deal that are enduring. President Bush tried to privatize Social Security and got badly burned by the third rail in American politics. The next cycle, coming in January 2009, will give us a national universal health care plan that will become, quote unquote, untouchable. It has been a torturous incremental process that we have endured to get there. Societal political transformation is not an event, not a discrete, isolated phenomenon. It is a long building process, often imperceptible to most observers, until it reaches full flower and dynamic power. It builds over many years until certain political, economic, and social forces converge to drive ascendancy and presence. The transformative moment is usually facilitated by unique leaders who embody the change values sought and who possess extraordinary communication skills that touch the yearnings or aspirations of the public. In March 1987, I gave a speech at the Council on Social Work Education on the rise of conservatism in religion and politics. At that time, I plotted out how conservative think tanks, assisted by the media, propagated intellectual fodder for the emergence of a conservative political movement that resulted in the presidency of Ronald Reagan. This is said to remind us that transformation in the body politic can take various political, ideological, or cultural directions. Reagan was a transformational political figure, not the kind of transformational figure social work cared for. In short, transformation comes in a variety of packages and seek very different ends. I stated in that speech, and I quote, "Tides, conservative or progressive, do not result from spontaneous combustion. They are fashioned by hard work over extended periods of time," end of quote. The transformative moment usually comes in an indecipherable bundle. So let me briefly pull apart the strands of the current bundle in order to understand the incremental processes that have led to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama standing on the threshold of the Oval Office. The validation for women probably started with the changes in the middle-class family as an economic unit. Once women's income was necessary to sustain family financial stability and their consumption power critical for the economy, women became more valuable in the society and secured greater access to opportunities in the workplace, increasingly breaking glass ceilings to reach near the top and sometimes the top. This phenomenon is clearer in academia, where despite gender discrimination in pay, tenure promotions, and academic appointments, we now have women presidents at Princeton, MIT, Harvard, Brown, and in the recent past at Duke and the University of Chicago. I always believed that a black person or woman would be elected President of the United States before a woman would be president at Harvard University. Of course, the sexist stupidity of Lawrence Summers obliterated that judgment. Last week, Jane Mandillo was appointed to manage Harvard's $34 billion endowment, continuing a growing trend in major universities and foundations where women are successfully managing large investment portfolios. During the last 2 decades, women are in the majority in elite medical and law schools. In order to control female dominance in these institutions, less qualified men are being admitted to these professional schools. Yes, affirmative action for men. In the political sphere, women have been elected governor in New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona, which is all I could remember. And women have also been mayors in Houston, Atlanta, Minneapolis, San Diego, etc. And when ABC television in prime time featured a program called Commander-in-Chief, starring Gina Davis, the public's attitudes about a real-life woman U.S. president were being reprogrammed. It is no accident that you have seen red phone television ads and Commander-in-Chief language during the current presidential campaign. The way was paved by primetime television in the 2005-2006 program year. So Hillary Clinton now stands on this platform of incremental change. I hasten to add this progress was too long in coming. Too many women have paid a horrific price of exclusion from positions of power due to gender discrimination throughout our society. Progress for black Americans is partially rooted in the passage of the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, which changed the political landscape of the South. It spawned ramped up voter registration and voting by blacks, leading to the election of black officials at the municipal, county, state, and congressional levels. Recently, we witnessed the result of this political empowerment in the South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana presidential primaries. Flowing from the race riots in over 70 cities in the 1960s and the civil rights legislation of the 1960s came affirmative action policies and practices in social institutions, both public and private. This phenomenon opened up opportunities for blacks previously closed off to them. Despite racial discrimination and marginalization in the work world, a few blacks have risen to CEO positions in corporations like American Express, Merrill Lynch, Time Warner, and Xerox, to name a few corporations. Starting in the 1960s, black politicians have been elected mayor in Los Angeles, Cleveland, Newark, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, and New York City, and many smaller cities in the country. Douglas Wilder was elected governor of Virginia. Edward W. Brooke, senator in Massachusetts. Carol Moseley Braun and Barack Obama elected in Illinois to the U.S. Senate. And we now have 34 black congressmen and women. The electoral political advances for blacks have been steadily building, while also demonstrating the ability to garner white support. Barack Obama now stands on the platform of this progress as he reaches for the presidency. None of what has just been cited can paper over the hard struggles the races of Harvey Gantt and Howell Ford for the U.S. Senate that should have been won if racist tactics by their opponents had not been used in the final hours of those political races. The change environment is now being shaped by a demographic revolution where Latinos are the largest minority of color. The impact of this change was seen in the primaries in California, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The empowerment of Latinos in Miami and Los Angeles is reflected in the election of Latino mayors in those two cities, and there is more to come elsewhere. Much of the demographic transformation is being driven by immigration, which continues to build in spite of the political hysteria that lives in too many places in the media and the political arena. It is the great humanitarian challenge of this era in the United States. More about that later. We cannot really understand the change sentiments that are loose without considering the impact of the internet. And I'm totally deficient. I can hardly turn on my email. A new young generation is being shaped by the images and messages that they consume on YouTube, Facebook, MySpace, My Happy Planet, and a variety of other cyberspace social network inventions. Mainstream television and radio stations have lost their power to control messages to this population. How the internet is being used to instantly mobilize thousands of people for causes blows my mind. Frankly, it is beyond my comprehension. I read an article recently about a woman in Ohio who for a year was using an organizing tool on Obama's website, which permitted her to connect with like-minded folks. She said these connections led to a group going out and cleaning up a neighborhood. She said, and I quote, "My involvement here is not just about an election. It is about taking responsibility for changing the landscape," unquote. That's very powerful. And despite the growing evidence of resegregation in housing and public schooling in America, opinion polls reveal that Generation X, persons born between 1965 and 1985, has growing social transactions and healthy relationships across racial, religious, and ethnic lines. One manifestation of this reality is the steady growth of interracial marriages. There are now 3.1 million interracial marriages, constituting 6% of married couples in this country. Today's New York Times has an interesting article on the front page on the social realities for mixed-race individuals. There are lots of laughs about blacks and whites finding out through DNA examination that they are related to people from a different racial group. Obama jokes about his cousin Dick Cheney. The nonsense about racial and ethnic purity, quote unquote, which lives in too many minds, is just that, nonsense. I sense that the change environment is partially about a new consciousness, about the folly of racism, xenophobia, and ethnocentrism. I am sure that you can identify a myriad of other factors shaping the change environment. Suffice it to say, change is in the air, and will social worker be a player in shaping its actualization? Or perhaps you think that what I am seeing is a mirage. First, there will be, in my judgment, a new Democratic administration, and therefore a new generation of policies and programs will be adopted. Powerful policy think tanks in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere are cooking up policy initiatives to have influence. Brookings Institution is developing an urban blueprint for consideration and adoption. And recently I talked with Mayor Menino's staff members who are a part of providing some data to the Brookings Institution. Where is social work in getting ready for the next generation of policy? That work is going on now, and we should be involved in it in major ways before the train is out of the station. Social workers need to be at the table because we have a great deal to contribute. We know that plagued urban schools cannot be transformed without effective services for at-risk students. We know that you can't build healthy school climates essential to having a decent learning environment without the group work and organizing skills and knowledge that social workers possess. The experiences our School of Social Work has had in the Chelsea Public Schools is a testament to the relevance and power of what social work can contribute to effective schooling. I moderated a program at City Year last week that was focused on the phenomenon of school dropouts in urban schools. And a very interesting researcher at Johns Hopkins laid out what the reality is. And there's growing concern that if we don't fix this problem, we are going to be in more serious problem, in a more serious situation in this society. You cannot have 30 to 40% of urban young people dropping out of school into social oblivion in neighborhoods, put on a conveyor belt to prison, and those who don't get into prison having awful consequences for communities. Can't have that. And there are now a whole set of people thinking deeply about it, and I sat there and listened to these folks, and at the end of the day, I said to them, folks, what you need are some social workers who have some skills in these areas. Because they went around saying, well, if we do such and such, at the end of the day, at least 10% of these kids in these high schools are going to have mental health problems that require certain mental health and social service. Okay, that's got to be dealt with. And if you don't deal with that, they're going to be disruptive for the whole school. Okay? There were just a whole set of things about attendance and you name it that we know about and could make a major contribution, to. Who is going to be the Harry Hopkins of the next Democratic administration? You all know who Harry Hopkins was? Are you too old to know Harry Hopkins? You know? Some people know. Harry Hopkins, he was the advisor to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who played a major role in shaping social welfare policy in this state and the building of a social welfare state after the disaster of the Republican administrations of the late 20s. Who's going to be the next Harry Hopkins? Is the social work community now about identifying and knowing who is going to play a major role in the next administration in terms of the social welfare programs and policies that have to be in place? Here is our opportunity. I have no hope, really, that we're probably about this. And I say that based upon the experience I had after the election of Deval Patrick in the Commonwealth. Fortunately, I got a call from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Judy Ann Bigby, asking me to come up and have a chat with her. She wanted to talk about DSS, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, what do I know? I've been out of social work for a while, really, da-da-da-da. But I went up for a chat. And clearly, there was a whole lot of thinking about what to do with DSS. Now, I knew there had never been a social worker as a DSS commissioner since its beginning. The social work community never had enough power for a very good social worker and manager to be the commissioner of DSS. And of course, that was going through my mind as we were having this talk about Harry Spence and this and that, and boom, 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 boom. Now, I had no idea what she was going to do. And I was not a part of getting rid of him, so don't put that out. But I am certainly glad that we finally came up with a social worker, Angela McLain, as the head of DSS. I then called a friend of mine and colleague who was at the United Way and said to her, what are you going to do about coming into the new, a social worker, what are you going to do about coming into the new administration? And she said, hey, Hubie, how do you know? I said, I don't know anything. I just want to know. I think it's time for you to leave the United Way and work for the new governor. And she says, well, I want to do that. That's Marilyn Anderson Chase, who is now the Assistant Secretary in the Department of Health and the Cabinet of Health and Human Services, playing a major role in oversight regarding all children and families programs. Okay? What I was concerned about was when I called the NASW leadership to find out what they were thinking about seizing these opportunities, they were out to lunch. They couldn't even tell me. I said, tell me, who are the most expert social workers we have in the field of child welfare and protection? Who are the kinds of folks we should be promoting? In the case the governor decides he wants a new commissioner of DSS. It was pathetic. It was pathetic. It was pathetic. And we should have been on this case long before Deval Patrick was elected, knowing that we had an opportunity here. We now know that if Barack Obama gets elected, and probably even if Hillary Clinton gets elected, that the Harlem Children's Zone in Central Harlem will be taken to 20 cities in this country. Do you all know the Harlem Children's Zone? This is a program, a mega program, focused in Central Harlem, where education, jobs, health care, mental health services, etc., are integrated into a whole pattern of services for a community to try to do a job with young children and families. I frankly don't know if it's really working. I intend soon to go down to look at the Harlem Children's Zone. As a person who ran a multi-service center in the 60s and 70s, learning a great deal about how hard it is to integrate services in a way that makes a difference, I'm interested to find out whether indeed we have integration of services in the way they should happen in the Harlem Children's Zone. But make no mistake about it. If Barack Obama becomes president, Jeffrey Canada, who's an extraordinary man, happens not to be a social worker, he's an educator. As far as I'm concerned, he's a hell of a social worker. He's unbelievable. Just heard him at Harvard the other day, unbelievable. And he was going to be a very powerful person and influence in the development of urban policy regarding services for families and children. And we ought to be about knowing what role we can play based upon the work we have done and the work we know about how you integrate services in urban communities. Now, unfortunately, we're not doing too much at times in urban communities, but we do know what we need to do. One of the things our cities used to have was absorption power. We were able to help newcomers to the country, to our communities, find a way to be absorbed into the social institutions and get the support and services they needed to become effective citizens. The settlement house in the early part of the 20th century was the start, basically, of social work. And it was the settlement house, a very important institution in communities that played a major role in socializing newcomers into the society. Well, our cities have lost absorption power. One, because we don't have the jobs, the manufacturing jobs that were available for the old immigrants. We don't have the jobs, and because it's a knowledge-based society, they don't have access to the job because they don't have the skills and the knowledge. And we don't have schools that did a fabulous socializing job in the old days. The schools aren't working. And in too many cases, the community service institutions, the group work serving institutions, aren't there in the community to the extent that they were. Okay? So we don't have this absorption power. And unless we get back to doing this, we're not going to be able to deal with the mounting immigrants and newcomers coming in to the community. This has been our historic role, and we should be about it. I mentioned earlier that immigration is our great challenge, our great humanitarian challenge. This School of Social Work has a long, noble history of providing education and training for immigrants, Southeast Asian refugees, Haitians, you name it. It was first, I believe, and probably still was through our continuing education program. I see Professor Lee Staples back here. He's now in the process of mounting a new program at a higher level to deal with getting newcomers, immigrants, into the social work profession, into the school. Very creative program. Talked with him and Cassandra Clay about it not long ago. Should be supported and needs to be done. This is the opportunity that we have. We know a great deal about what needs to be done to help provide services to this newcomer population. So let me stop there, because I promise not to pontificate, and I promise for this to be a conversation. Let me hear what you think about where we are. Is change in the air? If it is in the air, what does it mean for social work? What are the opportunities? What are the responsibilities? Or maybe it's a mirage. I seem to think, this is Social Work Month. I believe that we're about to have a social work decade. We're about to have a social work decade if we're up to the challenge of using our knowledge, using our skills, using our base, using our politics, quote unquote, to assert our proper role in what is about to happen. So thank you very much, and let's talk. Okay, just get up and identify yourself. Ask your question, or your comment, or whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Anita Pascucci-Stinson, and I wanted to comment on one of your last major points about immigration. There are many people, I among them, who feel that too many immigrants are coming into America legally and illegally and flooding the mechanisms that you discussed. And I wonder what your thoughts are on this matter, especially as they relate to the position that social work as a profession is taking on this matter, because I think that something that is compounding the problem is that because our systems are more and more dysfunctional, they are less and less able to constructively help immigrants. And I think the common sense answer is really to to stem the flow, even temporarily, so that the systems can, in fact, make good Americans out of the immigrants who come into the country?
One of the things that we have historically been able to do is to deal with the things that are required for our economy. When it was clear that we needed women in the workplace, we didn't have ramped up the child care facilities and all of the things that were needed for this to happen. But because it was an economic imperative, we went about doing what was required to make sure that this economic imperative was realized. And so we developed all kinds of things so that mothers could have their children cared for while they went to work. I happened to be recently taking my grandson to a nursery school program, and as I sat outside, as my daughter came, was inside and coming back, I was noticing all of these men and women who were bringing their kids in for daycare. One of the things I did notice was that there were many men who were dropping their kids off, and probably their wives were already at work. Okay? And probably their wives couldn't risk being late for work. The men could probably be late for work without any major consequences. Okay? And many of them were dropping off their kids who were not well. They were giving them Tylenol to bring their fevers down. Okay? Because they had to be in the daycare in the child care program, because the economy required that, and the two-earner family required it. So my point is that we thought that was an economic imperative to have women in the workforce, and we ramped up all of the services, structures, and so forth that were needed for this to take place. We do know now that immigrants coming into this country is a part of what we need for our economy. If we did not have a flow of immigrants into Massachusetts, we would not have enough people for our workforce. There was a major study done by the Mass Inc., which laid out the fact that if we had not had immigrants coming in major numbers to this state, we would not have enough folks for the workforce. Okay? Folks are here because we want their labor. We want their cheap labor. Okay? And we need it. That's why they're here. So, and they're a very real part of our economy. Okay? So if they are a real part of our economy, then we better get about providing the schooling, the services, and so forth that makes it possible for them to be a vital part of our community, is what I would say. Okay? This is an economic reality. And although you get from these talk show hosts, all of this babble about these immigrants coming in, flooding the place, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, we shouldn't do it, let's put up a fence, all that nonsense. Let's put up a fence, okay? These are the same folks that are having these folks cut their lawns, okay? Take care of their kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? And so it's, so we're talking, so this is a whole economic thing, and there's a whole hysteria around this. This is not to say that we don't have a problem or a challenge in providing the structures and mechanisms and services so that these people, so that folks coming in have an opportunity to be integrated and absorbed. When I went to Israel in 1983 with the School of Social Work, one of the most fascinating things I learned about was their absorption centers. They had an absorption program with clear policies and practices to integrate foreigners, Falasha Jews, and okay? We're having no serious problem that I know of, really, with the Russians who have come into the Boston area, They are being taken care of by the Jewish agencies, big time. Big time. They're getting housing. They're getting jobs. They're getting support. Okay? And nobody that I know of is raising questions about them because they've been integrated and absorbed. Okay? We got a problem with immigration now because there are folks of color coming in large numbers. Okay, I'm not suggesting anything here, but I mean that's just a reality. Okay? Okay? That's part of the problem. That we have not been ready or willing to deal with this new class of immigrants and newcomers. It's just a whole different bag. You know, we're still getting folks from Ireland here. Nobody is raising a question. I mean, I went to a restaurant the other day. This waitress was with her Irish brogue was here talking to me and all this kind of stuff. Nobody's raising question about whether she should be here. Nobody's raising about whether she should be here because of a whole set of things based upon Boston and da 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 da. So I don't know. That's my response. Yes.
Sheila Mooney, class of 1980.
Sheila Mooney, how are you?
Wonderful to see you.
Good to see you.
I really appreciate the optimism of your vision, and I was looking for a boost to borrow somebody else's optimism. I came particularly because I work in a suburban mental health center now. They let me out of prison finally. And I see so much poverty among people who are hardworking, honest, decent people. I was used to a certain amount of people on my caseload struggling with the issues of SSDI and homelessness, etc. It's just enormous now. I also know that the quality of life for social workers has slid down. People at work will honestly talk about problems paying their medical bills, etc. And there was a time when we didn't discuss those things. It wasn't necessary to discuss those things. So if you have some comments or some light to shed on this whole issue of what I understand is that the middle class is you're either going up or you're going down. If you have some light to shed on that, I would appreciate that.
Well, I don't know if I have light, but I think it's pretty clear that not only do we have trouble at the bottom in terms of the poverty class, quote unquote, and the fact that we've had a set of economic policies over the last 8 years that have taken the benefits from the bottom and sent them to the top in terms of taxation and all of the rest. But we have a middle class that is feeling squeezed and, 2 months from poverty or 2 months from, being very, very, in very bad shape. And a serious illness would send many of these middle class families into total disarray. So what we have before us is a challenge to do something about providing the work opportunities and the safety net, which has been shredded, for these families. At the end of the day, we've got to do something about eliminating poverty in this country. And we've got to have the national policies and the state policies that make that possible. We have been in a private interest cycle, as I indicated, and we now have to have a public purpose cycle where we are going to focus, on folks who are being left out, neglected, and languishing in the corners of our communities. That has to happen. Yes, I think one of the things we are seeing that many of the people providing human services are one step from not only poverty, but clienthood. Okay? All right? Okay? Yeah, we have a lot of people serving folks who are so fragile based upon the challenges they face with their families and with the economy that they are one state from clienthood. And I would myself hate to be running a social agency today in terms of the human resource personnel challenges that I would have. because there would have to be a whole creative, interventive thing done to shore up the people who are providing the services. And I don't have to tell you, we are still not paying social workers what they deserve. We are not being paid commensurate with our value in this society. And those of you who were in my classes and in the school when I was dean, you heard this all the time. And I used to go after you about not taking certain pay. And I held a seminar for graduating students, telling them how to negotiate and what not to take, and da 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 da. But we're still taking it. We're still taking it, and we've got to, we've got to deal with that as well. Not that we're just simply into bread and butter issues, because that's not what we are about as a profession. Okay, but let's be real. If we're going to be providing these services, if we're going to be adding value to communities and to social institutions, we've got to be paid commensurate with our value. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Hubie.
Hi.
Laurie Messina, class of '91. And Hubie, you were a great mentor. And what you just said, I felt I needed to comment on. Yes, you did tell us that we always would have to stand up for not only other people's rights, but our own rights. And when you ask where does social work and social workers come into the play nowadays, you have to be ready to know your worth and go to the tables and negotiate your worth with that, because that worth will translate to all the other people that you're working with or working to advocate for. And so I've taken it for years and tried to do just that. And I think that every time that you hear, well, what do you have as a social worker? What do you have as an MSW versus I'm in education, as an educator? And then you really have to get not creative, you have to go back to Hubie's resume and say what doesn't a social worker know how to do? What skills don't they bring with them? They have to know how to negotiate, they have to be able to do a multiple of skills, group dynamics. And when you talk about grassroots, both the candidates in the Democratic Party are using good old social work grassroots skills right now. So I think it's important for us to take those skills and use them wisely.
Thank you. I agree.
Thank you. Joy Lonsdale, class of 2006. I've heard amazing things about you, and I'm very happy to hear you speak in person. I just wanted to make a comment on the debate around immigration, because I think this is a really critical issue based on, and I really appreciate your comments, Hubie, about this. I think this is a huge, pressing civil rights issue of today, and I'm very aware of how historically, in the social work profession, during the time of the civil rights movement, although individual social workers contributed and were very active in the civil rights movement, many social workers took a back seat, and as a group, social workers didn't organize en masse around civil rights. I think immigration is one of these very, very complicated issues that we're faced with today, and something that we're increasingly going to need to take a stand on and take advantage of the political space that exists. And I think it's very important because this is an issue that is such a divisive issue, and as our president is, financing the Iraq War and military intervention in Afghanistan, it's very easy for those of us who are directly caring for the people who are feeling the heat of missing those dollars to get into this scapegoating politics that the politicians are opposing. And I think it's very easy for those of us who are caring for non-immigrants, those who are veterans who are returning from the war, those who are, on welfare, who are struggling in the food lines and so on, to blame immigrants, as are our politicians. But I think it's really important that social workers take a stand in not allowing those scapegoating politics to take place, and for those of us to stand up and join the people who are marching across the country in the growing immigrant rights movement to take a stand on the fact that these are people who are trying to feed their families just like anyone else. And for those immigrants who started coming in the third wave of immigration after 1965, who are more people of color, those continue to be people who need services and need orientation and need support. And the last thing I just want to say is that there was a very important policy study done, I believe it was about 5 years ago, that showed that immigrants contribute about $25 billion more to the U.S. economy than they take in social services.
And I think, you know, we should always, thank you. You know, coming out of the civil rights movement, which was a training ground for a whole bevy of leadership, let's be clear that the movement regarding immigration is going to be a training ground for the next political leadership in this country. Okay? What you're seeing in Miami, what you're seeing in Los Angeles, what you're seeing in many other cities right now is this is also about politics. Okay, this is also about politics. And they're going to be a political force in this country. And in parts of the country where they before had not been a political force. And it is a part of this organizing work is how do we train the next generation of political leadership through these struggles. Okay? Hey, I never thought I was going to run for the United States Congress. That was the last thing on my political agenda. But coming out of the civil rights work in Boston in the 60s, somehow it happened. I got trained. I got prepared to think about political leadership. Now the people were wise enough not to elect me, but that's another whole matter. So I think we have to look at it. We have to look at it in that way as well. Yes.
Michael Novak, class of '97. As we look towards the future, and also as we look towards just the current practice right now, what recommendations would you make for social work education in terms of addressing change in the future, and how best can we look towards implementing these changes within our curriculum?
Well, one of my big failures as a dean was that before I left, I never got becoming proficient in Spanish as a requirement for graduation. You should have heard some of the faculty meetings around that idea. Because when you're in academia, everybody's fighting for their space and protecting their space in the curriculum. Now, if you start talking about this nonsense, what's going to come out? What are we going to lose? Because we really need more clinical courses anyway, or we really need more policy. This, okay? I just got very disturbed by the services that were being conveyed via interpreters. Okay, and you have to know about what gets changed in the translation. Okay? And I think we've got to have social workers who are more committed to becoming proficient in foreign languages, particularly for the clientele that they serve. Now, obviously, we've got to do more of what we have done in the past, and I said Lee Staple is about that, is getting people from these groups who are competent in social work practice to go out and serve their communities and others as well. We've got to do, this is a global world. There's no social work student in my judgment, who should get out of school who hasn't, as a part of their curriculum, been to some foreign country to learn about other cultures, politics, economics, and so forth. Okay, now we did that, I don't know what's going on now, but when I was there, one of the things we did was we had courses that, travel policy courses that took folks to Cuba and England and China and da-da-da-da-da-da, because it was an important part of signaling to our students and future social workers that you can't be a social worker worth anything at all, in my judgment, if you do not have a global perspective. if you do not understand, first of all, you don't understand this country until you get outside of it and hear what other people think about us and what other people feel about us. Not as individual citizens, but as a government, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You just have to have that as a have to have that, I believe, as a part of your education. And I'm glad to see when I do get some of the brochures from some of the schools of social work around the country, I'm seeing more and more opportunities for students to travel abroad, okay, and to learn best practices, cultures, so I would be high on that. Obviously, nobody should get out of a school of social work today if they don't understand the internet. and if they don't understand its power, and if they don't understand how to use it, okay, you know, as incredible tools for the work that we do. Okay, somebody said that some of these candidates are really terrific social workers. Yeah, Barack Obama's a social worker. When you look at how he's organized his campaign. Okay, I don't know whether he wins or loses, right? Okay, no, I'll be happy if he wins. But I've been just looking at how he has organized his campaign. The marriage of shoe leather that Lee Staples knows about, knocking on doors, you know, the shoe leather, and the internet, the marriage of those two things, to mobilize people in effective ways is just, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And I think about all the leaflets I heard handed out in the 60s and all the door knocking I did, and somebody gets on the internet and gets a group of people together in, you know, in 2 minutes. Okay? So I just think that knowing more about the internet, how to use it, you know, for clinical practice, group work practice, organizing particularly, I think it is absolutely important because other professions are on that case. Yes.
Chick Ackley, class of '54.
No.
I have been practicing traditional social work since the beginning of the 60s, I think, so I'm pretty much out of it, but I've been very involved in national and global policies, and I'm tremendously excited about the possibilities for change. And I'm just wondering if Obama is elected, which it seems this is a possibility, I think he is a very good listener and is going to seek out people who really can be good consultants and be good on committees or whatever. And I'm wondering what the social work profession can do to help NASW or to try to get people there for him that have these kind of understanding and perspective, because I think this profession is extremely valuable and has so much potential, but I think a lot of social workers sort of have their nose in their belly buttons, you know, you just need to think globally, and so anyhow, that's a question.
Good question. Yes? Anybody want to comment that, or you have your own question?
I have my own.
Go ahead.
Susan Schlesinger, letterer, class of '74, and almost parent of 2008.
Whoa.
So I consider that my greatest contribution to social work. So I have a lot of hope for the future.
Let's see what kind of social worker she becomes first, okay? Okay. I'm sure she'll be fine.
I've been in healthcare my entire social work career and have seen lots and lots of changes. I have two concerns, though, that maybe you can make some comments about. I did work for the VA for 12 years and see that it's in a devastating condition at this point. It wasn't great when I was there, but it's a lot worse now. And one of my concerns has to do with how long it's going to take to pick up the pieces after the Bush administration, and are we going to be able to accomplish that before we get another Republican administration to do the damage again? But I also have seen programs come and go, funding gets slashed, and that's another concern. I think we need so much, and where are we going to get the funding, and who's going to go to bat for that?
In fact, my wife said to me last night or this morning, I can't remember, but it was, there's so much damage that has been done, that there is so much that has to be rebuilt and undone and rebuilt, that whoever becomes president has a very daunting job. I mean, that's a given. I think we know that the VA is going to get some attention, serious attention, no matter who becomes president. The Walter Reed embarrassment, the thousands of veterans coming home now, injured, limbs off, brain injured, okay? It is roiling the American people. And it is politically required that there be a major recasting of the Veterans Administration and the services that are to be provided, okay? And so no matter who becomes president, I think the political pressure is on doing major things about services for veterans, okay? And trying to shore up and rebuild our VA system. I have no doubt, I'd put money on it, that major investment is going to be made there. Now, will the social workers who know the VA and who know all of these services and are they going to be in a position to be heard, and not only be heard, but play an implementation role, if not leadership role, in what the New Deal is going to be here, okay? Because I am absolutely convinced that the VA system is going to be totally overhauled. It is a total embarrassment. Even the Pentagon is totally embarrassed and upset by what has happened at Walter Reed and other places around the country. I've just heard unbelievable stories about veterans coming back, needing unbelievable services, injured and all of the rest, and they've got to go miles to a VA hospital in some rural area. Okay, that's going to have to be addressed, and I think it will be. The question is, how well would it be addressed, and will all of the right players be there who know what to do? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Melissa Sparks in the class of 2007. Thank you.
2007. Well, you just graduated. All right.
That's part of the problem. I just want to hop back a few steps to your comment about our role, our upcoming role, and understanding social work outside of this country, understanding the history of this country from a perspective outside of this country and how vital that is. And that while I was here, I did not know about the history of the Bridge program. And I did meet with Lee for lunch a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about, where did that happen? When did that happen? What was that? And pleased to hear about that it's coming back to life, that it's rekindling it. And the fact is that we do have a professor here, recent to our faculty, Luz Lopez, who is with great support, but with great vision, also created the Puerto Rican experience, identifying this great community of Puerto Ricanos we have in our community that also need services still to meet their needs, to meet people where they are, and that the more that we get out as social workers outside of ourselves and into other communities, the better we function within those communities and can educate and share our knowledge with the people that we're supposed to be helping, as a reminder of our role as change agents. And that I'm guessing that the majority of people that showed up today are folks that remember to think globally, even though the work, the positions that we have, the jobs that we have, the pressures and stresses of the work that we have squish us, are constantly containing us, policy constantly containing us, and that in those environments we tend to lose our voice. Anybody tends to lose their voice, and that it is important that we retain our voice, that we communicate, that we show up here, that we have the opportunity to listen to those before us. Thank you so much for your work and service. To be motivated to have our voice and show others how to have their voice, because it's not us alone that's obviously doing this work. It's us stimulating the communities that we work with to force the policy that they need. And just wanted to thank you.
Let me just play off of that a bit. There are absolutely two things any social worker in today's world has to have. They have to have the space and the courage to have a voice. Okay? That's number one. And you have to have a life rhythm that makes it possible for you to take in information from very diverse sources, so you know what the real deal is in this country and in this world. Okay? And those were the two things I talked a great deal about when I was dean of the School of Social Work. Everybody has to decide how they have a life rhythm that makes it possible for them to be totally informed folks. Okay? And in very busy lives, you've got to do that. My wife is here, and she'll tell you that at 4:30 in the morning, the Boston Globe and the New York Times lands on our doorstep. And by 5:30 in the morning, we are devouring the latest news. The latest news. Okay? And on my way to work, I pick up USA Today. People say, why USA Today? People think it's the funny the funny pages. Okay? But USA Today has black management. And because it has black management, the way they place their stories, the headlines they have, what they cover, is different than the New York Times, the Boston Globe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once I went into a class with a story from the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and USA Today, and I said, well, what do you think? They said, well, it's the same information, but it's totally different messages. Okay? And I hasten home, if possible, to get the news hour. The only real news on television with Jim Lehrer on PBS. Okay? So you can hear a discussion of an intelligent discussion of what is going on beneath the surface. And then about once or twice a week, place I go to get lunch, I pick up the Financial Times to find out what Europe is saying about the economy and getting that perspective. And then, of course, on Sunday morning, I devour all the pundits. Okay? Okay? Some of which drives my wife crazy. That's why she's giggling here. Okay? All right? All right? And I used to be one of them for 20 years. That's my life rhythm for getting the info. And then, of course, now in your case, there's professional literature now you've got to read. Okay? And if you don't have a voice, and if you're not fully informed, you're going to burn out. I'm just going to tell you what it is. You are going to burn out. No? Okay? And I used to rail against all these burnout workshops that we had in social work. Continuing education. I used to say, stop the burnout workshops and just run the agencies in a way in which people are, the workers are treated and supported and with professional development, all the rest, and they won't burn out. Okay? Why don't we just run these places like they have a soul? Okay? You don't want to hear that speech. You know, I give a speech on soulless institutions. Well, we have too many soulless institutions. Okay? Too many soulless institutions, and many of them are social agencies. Let's be clear. Many of them are social agencies. Okay? And if you're working in an organization that has a soul, okay, you're probably not going to burn out. You're not going to feel squeezed. You're going to be more productive. One of the most incredible experiences I ever had as a teacher here. I was running I had a seminar I taught for graduating students called Perspectives on American Society. In fact, Betty Ruth was in that course once. And in the middle of the seminar, a student asked the question, how many of you here have ever had an experience that would let you know what it would be like to live in an ideal society? Oh. And somebody said, well, why are you asking that question? He said, well, we keep saying that what we're working toward is creating an ideal society, you know, and a just society and all the rest. And, well, how would we know we ever got there? Have you ever had an experience that would let you know? And so the class went around, and everybody started answering the question, and they finally looked at me and said, what's your answer? And I suddenly came to realize that my answer was that I worked in a summer camp as a counselor. A co-ed camp, interracial camp, children's camp. In fact, I met my wife there. That's where it all happened. And it was the only place, only community I ever lived in that was as close to race being neutral as anything. Now race is never neutral in America, don't get me wrong. But people were dealt with based upon the human attributes they brought to the camp, to the community. And their strengths were built on and nourished. And nobody, and you know, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And in the work that I've done in leading institution is my goal is to create institutions that are a microcosm of an ideal community, of an ideal society. That's what I tried to do at the Boston University School of Social Work. That's what I've tried to do when I've run social agencies. That's what I'm trying to do now in the development of the Boston Children's Chorus. Okay? That's our job. To make sure that the places we go, where we have any influence, and is that we're trying to help people feel and know what it's like to be in an ideal society. And in fact, on June 6th or 7th, Kathy and I are going to Cooperstown, New York, where old campers and counselors are going to gather, now in their 70s and 60s, and once again we'll sit around and talk about this is the only place we've had in our lives where we've had this kind of experience. Okay? All right? So when you ask about social work curriculum, the job is for every student who lives here in their 70s and 80s to be saying, I had an experience at the Boston University School of Social Work, okay, that stood me in a particular place regarding human relationships and so forth, that I had nowhere, that probably didn't have any other place in my society, in the society. You know, I just had a discussion with the staff at the Boston Children's Chorus, saying, I want every child, when they're 50 and 60, who've been a singer in this chorus, at 50 and 60 saying, this was the most important experience in my development as a young person. That's your job. To run the institution in that way, provide the services and supports in that way, that people have that kind of experience. We cannot change the world, right? I mean, we should try. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? Okay? But we have some control, okay, over the institutions in which we operate. No? Now, too often we are passive. We go along to get along. We don't want to be wave makers. No? Okay? We don't want to be wave makers. Now, in fact, I had some social work students who got all fired up in some of my courses, and they advocacy course, and they were going to go out and change the Pentagon, and they were going to go out and change this, and they were prisons. And I said, your first job is to go into an agency, demonstrate that you know what you're doing and you have value. So you have a reputation. So you can begin to say some things about what needs to be changed. Don't talk to me about the Pentagon. Don't talk to me about prisons. You know, don't talk to me about, you know, the bad school system if you can't change your agency. If you can't be a force for transformation in your agency. Right? And let me tell you something. If you're not a respected force in your agency in terms of the services you're delivering, you can't be an effective advocate. I won't tell you about, there were a couple of folks who tried to take my job because I was a troublemaker advocate in the community. Okay? One called my boss, my first boss, in fact, at Boston Children's Services, and Chick knows who I'm talking about, Dr. Wallen, because I was leading a general strike in Boston, and they started calling him saying, you know, hey, you know, this, and he said, wait a minute, I don't know what you're talking about. This guy's a fabulous social worker. He's one of our best group workers, so I don't know what your problem is. Da 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 da. Okay? End of discussion. If you're not doing fabulous work and you get out to be an advocate and people know you're not doing fabulous work and you're not coming to work when you have a little cold and all that kind of nonsense, they change the subject. You give them the opportunity to change the subject, to talk about your professional whatever, okay? Because this is, you know, this is a village and everybody knows what the real deal is, right? So I think that's our challenge, and our agencies have to be a base for organizing with a small o and or a large O, but it's an economic and political instrument. You know, whether we like it or not. Okay, you know. I had some social workers at the Roxbury Multi-Service Center that didn't like the idea that I said that, you know, you have a responsibility to make sure our clients are registering to vote and voting. I said, that's part of our responsibility. Now, I'm not going to tell you when within your clinical relationship you should get to that matter, because that would be nuts, okay? That would be violative of clinical treatment, but at some point, you better get to it. And I had a few people who objected to that, saying, I didn't understand clinical work. I said, well, maybe you should find a job doing clinical work somewhere else. Because you can't go around and talking about empowering people when they're not exercising their franchise to vote. Okay? Now, I'm glad I have lived long enough to see Boston's black community politically empowered, registered and voting in substantial numbers. okay, in substantial numbers. Post-Menino, we are close to having a black or Latino mayor or Asian mayor in Boston. No questions in my mind, because of the robust voting power that now exists in Boston's neighborhoods. Okay? I never thought I'd live long enough to see it. Okay? And the mayor of this city is quite careful now about dealing with issues of consequence to folks of color, because he understands the political power that people of color have in the community. I just got a call from him out of the blue the other day. I don't have anything going with Menino. In fact, he basically doesn't trust me because he knows I'll tell him what it is, what it's like, okay, and all the rest, okay? But I get this call, I'm like, what's this all about? You know? But what it's about is he's thinking about trying to do something about the transportation issues in Boston, meaning changing the patterns of transportation and maybe neighborhood schools and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay? And he's trying to find out where people are and what kind of political cover he can get, because he knows that if he handles this issue in the wrong way, he'll be blown sky high. Okay? He'll be blown sky high. Okay? And the next issue coming is consolidation of schools in Boston, which has a whole set of racial things involved in that, around choice and da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, that's the next potential minefield for the mayor. It's a minefield for him now because there is a robust voting situation here with people of color. 20 years ago, nobody would care what we thought, what the parents thought in the black and Latino community. They just roll on and do it anyway. Okay? In fact, they were about to do a new assignment program that the black community was saying, parents were saying they did not want, and they were about to push it anyway. And what happened? Andrea Cabral, the black woman who ran for sheriff, okay, won against an Irish Catholic city councilor with a robust vote in the black community and Latino community and Asian community, and got half of the votes in West Roxbury, Hyde Park, and Roslindale, the old white bastions. Menino said, oops, and he shut down the assignment plan. Took it off the table. Now he's trying to go back to the assignment plan through transportation and school consolidation. But we have a situation of political empowerment going that means that the interest of the community will be heard, will be served. Okay? And that's why our folks voting is so important. And finally, let me say this. Some of you have to think about running for political office. Or if you don't want to run for political office, you have to be involved in political campaigns. Okay? Helping good people who care about our issues, who will support our issues, get elected. And in some cases, positioning yourself to play an active role in their administrations. Now, getting major jobs is not just about it's not just about merit. Some of it's about what you've done to get the person into the position. Okay? And there is no campaign of any consequence where we shouldn't be playing a role. Okay? And And that's important. And we've got to deal with the media, and we've got to write letters to the editor and all the rest, you know, because the people we get into power can be taken out of power. Now, I think Deval Patrick did something very, I'll say stupid, but not a good thing concerning the casino stuff. Okay? I was opposed to it on the merits, on the substance, and I was opposed to it on the politics. Okay? And the issue is about to drown every good thing he is doing. So I hear people who were gun-ho Deval Patrick, who are now saying, well, he was a good talker, like they said about Barack. He was a good talker, and he was exciting and so forth. But the man can't run diddly squat. Okay? Well, that is not true. We have had some of the biggest policy initiatives under this governor in a short period of time than we haven't seen under any governor. Okay? But you'd never know it. Okay? By the time Joan Bonacci gets a hold of him and all these other folks, you'd never know it. You know, most people don't know that there's a $12 billion capital budget passed. And a great deal of that is going to go to the public universities that never got any public money to deal with maintenance and buildings. I was at UMass Boston for 10 years, and I used to dodge the puddles, you know, coming through the catwalk, and there were buckets out there to catch it. And no politician in the State House or governor was doing anything about that condition. It was an insult to students. The only university in this area that has the most students of color. Okay, and they're dodging, you know, okay? That's not going to be, that's going away because of a $12 billion capital budget that this guy has passed. A $1 billion life sciences program, which I think makes sense. We just heard that they've used, unfortunately, this unfortunate incident with the child in Marlboro, DSS. Well, they've moved to lower the caseloads. Okay? They're moving to lower the caseloads from 18 to 17. And then they're going to get it down to 6. Then they're going to get it down to 6. I mean, from 18 to 17, and then they're going to get it down. The next move is to 16. And ultimately, they'll get it down to the 12 to 15 that the Child Welfare League says is what it should be the standard. Okay? That's happening. Okay? That's happening. Because when I met with Judy Ann Bigby when I was telling you that first time, I said, okay, what are you all going to do about the caseloads? What kind of money do you need? Spence tells me we need $70 million to get it down to 16. Okay, well, now they just put up, $700 million. $700 million. They just put up $380 million. Okay? That's going to happen. Money for the arts. Nobody's even talking about the money that's going into the arts here. This is a state that doesn't do what other states do in terms of providing public money for the arts. Okay? This governor is committed to that, and he's already put money there for facilities and for programs. Nobody knows about that. I'm not a musician or anything else, but I know, because I'm doing the Boston Children's Chorus, because I know the arts is the best way to bring young people together across racial and social and ethnic and social class divides. It took me years to wake up to find that to be the case. Tried every other thing to do it. Didn't work. Okay? But the arts is a powerful way to get that done. And money's going, and money's going, and money's going there. And there's going to be this readiness project to support public education in the state. They're going to roll out a plan. Now, God knows where the money's going to come from, okay? But at least we're talking about community colleges being tuition free. You're looking at a person who went to the City College of New York, and if it wasn't a free tuition college, I probably wouldn't be here. Or one of my sisters wouldn't be here. I mean, there were 5 of us. I don't know, maybe some of us would have gone to college and some of us wouldn't. I don't know. If I had to go this way again, I'd be a professional social worker. There is no profession that is everywhere in the society. We are in every imaginable social institution in this society, bringing skills and philosophy and commitment and values that are desperately needed. There is no profession like this. Okay? There is no profession like this. So let's be proud of it on social. Let's be proud of it. Thanks for coming.